I did.
Okay, so hello to everyone present here. We are really glad to see such a huge turnout for this event. This is the IASA-Africa chapter, and this is the second of its kind of the IASA initiative of the IASA continental chapters. Professor Brent would obviously speak more about it. This is one of a kind of initiative by IASA to reach out to different continents and different countries across the world, and to diversify the field of American studies in general. So without wasting further time, I would like to say hello to Professor Bilge, the IASA president. Dr. Georgie Toth is here. He is the IASA Emerging Scholars Coordinator. And Dr. Alassane, Dr. Alaji, welcome all. And also now I would like to request Professor Stefan Brandt from the University of Graz to introduce us about this event and talk to us about the IASA continental chapters. Please, Professor.
Thank you, Cheikh. Dear colleagues, dear guests, dear friends, it is a great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the International American Studies Association to a conversation that moves across continents, languages, and intellectual traditions. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere thanks to our hosts and partners at the Department of English at the Université Numérique Cheikh Hamidou Khan. And if I understand it correctly, this is Cheikh Hamidou Khan's birthday today, April 2nd. So congratulations. This is a wonderful event. My special thanks goes to Dr. Alassane Abdoulaye Dia for organizing and moderating today's event. And I hope I'm pronouncing all names correctly. I did my best to study pronunciation beforehand. It is wonderful to see the IASA-Africa chapter so active and vibrant. This webinar is a perfect example of what IASA stands for. Connection across borders, dialogue across disciplines, and the ongoing rethinking of what American studies can and should be. I am also speaking today on behalf of our IASA president, Bilge Cetintas, and she is there just watching and attending. Hi, Bilge, who sends her warm greetings and full support for this event. What makes today's topic especially exciting is its movement across intellectual and cultural spaces. We are not simply discussing American studies. We are exploring how African American intellectual traditions travel, how they are translated, and how they are reinterpreted in new institutional, linguistic, and cultural contexts. As the flyer that Dr. Dia prepared puts it, today's talk asks how these traditions, quote, translate into the field of French Anglophone Studies, end of quote. This is a crucial question because it reminds us that knowledge is never static. It circulates, it adapts, it encounters resistance, and it produces new meanings wherever it arrives. In this sense, today's webinar is not only about African American thought, it is also about intellectual exchange, about translation in the broadest sense, linguistic, cultural, and epistemological. This is precisely what IASA positions itself and where it positions itself. We are committed to fostering a truly global American studies, one shaped by multiple perspectives, multiple locations, and multiple voices. Events like this make that vision tangible. They show that American studies is not confined to the United States, but takes shape in Senegal, in France, in Turkey, in the Caribbean, in Austria, and in the connections between these places. Today's speaker, Dr. Cheikh Nguirane, brings exactly this kind of transnational perspective. His work on the African diaspora, Pan-African thought, and Black intellectual traditions offers a powerful lens through which to rethink the field. Let me close with a brief thought. At a time when academic fields are often under pressure to define themselves more narrowly, events like this remind us of the opposite necessity: to remain open, dialogic, and attentive to voices that reshape our frameworks. This is what keeps our field alive and what makes gatherings like today's so valuable. Thank you again to everyone involved in organizing this webinar, and thank you all for joining us. I wish you all an inspiring and engaging session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bent. That was a wonderful start to the event. Also, hello to our Secretary, Maria Dogan, Elizabeth, who's also here, the IASA Treasurer, and Yasmina is also here, so hello Yasmina as well. So let's just get going to the next address, and this is Dr. Alaji Mamadou Sane. He is the director of the School of Humanities, Social Science and Education of the University Cheikh Hamidou Khan. Please, Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Dear colleagues, dear Ahmed Ishaq, dear Professor Brand, and dear Dr. Bilje. I hope I did not mispronounce. Dear speaker, Dr. Cheikh Nguirane, dear colleague, Dr. Ja, head of our department, English department, esteemed scholars, dear students, dear guests. It's both an honor and a pleasure for me as a director of the School of Art, Humanities, and Education at Cheikh Hamidou Khan Digital University to welcome you to this academic webinar organized by the Department of English of our university in partnership with the International American Studies Association, Africa Chapter. At the outset, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this event for this commitment to fostering academic dialogue and scholarly engagement. Initiatives such as this webinar contribute significantly to the intellectual life of our university and reflect our institutional dedication to promoting research, critical thinking, and international academic collaboration. The theme of today's webinar, How African American Intellectual Tradition Translate into the Field of French Anglophone Studies, is both timely and intellectually stimulating. It invites us to reflect on the circulation of ideas across geographical, cultural, and linguistic boundaries, and to examine the enduring influence of African American intellectual traditions on the development of Anglophone studies within Francophone academic contexts. For decades, African American intellectual traditions have played a crucial role in shaping scholarly debates on key issues such as identity, race, diaspora, cultural memory, and social justice. These traditions have generated powerful bodies of knowledge that continue to inform contemporary discussions in fields such as American studies, post-colonial studies, diaspora studies, and cultural studies. In the context of French Anglophone studies, engaging with these intellectual traditions opens valuable perspectives for rethinking critical approaches to literature, history, and culture. It allows scholars and students alike to situate their research within broader transnational frameworks that highlight the historical and cultural connection between Africa, the America, and Europe. We particularly honored today to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Cheikh Nguirane, from the Université des Antilles. His scholarship and expertise will undoubtedly provide important insights into the ways African American intellectual traditions intersect with and enrich the field of Anglophone studies. I would like also to acknowledge the valuable role of our moderator, Dr. Alassane Abdoulaye, head of the Department of English and coordinator of the International American Studies Association Africa Chapter. His dedication to strengthening academic collaboration and advancing the students the study of Anglophone cultures deserve our sincere recognition and thanks. Beyond its scholarly importance, this webinar also represents a meaningful opportunity for our students. It enables them to deepen their knowledge of Anglophone studies, discover international research perspectives, and engage directly with specialists in the field. Such intellectual exchanges are essential for nurturing the next generation of scholars who will contribute to the advancement of the humanities in Africa and beyond. Dear colleagues and students, through initiatives like this one, our university continues to pursue its mission of performing, promoting, and open, innovative, and globally connected higher education environment grounded in academic excellence and intellectual curiosity. Allow me, in closing, to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this webinar, to our distinguished speaker and moderator, and to all participants who have taken the time to join us today. I wish you all a stimulating and enriching webinar. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you
Dr.
so much, Director. Yeah, could I?
Yeah, you have the floor.
Yeah, okay. So thank you so much for this. Let me just take this moment to introduce the moderator for today's event, Dr. Alassane Abdoulaye. He will be introducing to us the speaker, and the speaker will speak for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we can open the floor for discussions. Dr. Alassane, thank you so much for everything, for doing everything that you could to organize this event. And please, could you please kindly introduce us to the speaker of the session? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isya. Dear Director of the School of Humanities, Social Science and Education, University in Senegal, dear President of the Association, dear Scientific Director of IASA, dear IASA members, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. It is a great honor and a pleasure for me to welcome you all to the first webinar organized under the auspices of the International American Studies Association through the IASA chapter, which I coordinate in collaboration with the Department of English of my university, which I also chair. So I am humbled to serve as host of this great academic event. On behalf of the organizing institutions, IASA-Africa Chapter and the Department of English of my university, I would like to express my deep sense of gratitude to all participants joining us from different parts of the world. I can see more than 300 participants online. Your presence today is a testimony to the growing importance of transnational and interdisciplinary dialogue. I would like to salute the commitment of the International American Studies Association to create continental chapters and to give me the privilege to coordinate the IASA-Africa chapter. This vision fosters intellectual exchange across continents, as well as the invaluable role played by departments of English in promoting innovative and accessible academic spaces in West Africa and beyond. This webinar is historic in the department, and I would like to thank IASA for the opportunity and collaboration of faculty, staff members, authorities, tutors, students, both graduate, undergraduates, doctoral students, members of the Federal English Club, and participants from all over the world. I can see more than 300 of you online. Today is also a special day. It is the birthday of our godfather, Cheikh Hamidou Kane, who celebrates his 98th birthday today. Please join me to wish happy birthday to Cheikh Hamidou Kane, who is an icon in African literature and a proud son of Senegal. Today's webinar addresses a particularly stimulating theme: how African-American intellectual traditions translate into the field of French Anglophone studies. This topic invites us to reflect on the circulation of ideas across linguistic, cultural, and academic boundaries. It encourages us to rethink how African-American intellectual histories deeply rooted in resistance, resilience, and critical inquiry are received and sometimes contested within different epistemological traditions, particularly in the French academic context. As we navigate contemporary global conversations of race, identity, and knowledge production, especially in the wake of renewed Black international movements, this debate is not only relevant, but necessary. It is now time to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Cheikh Nguirane. First of all, Dr. Nguirane is, beyond the professional link, a friend of mine. As we graduated from the same university and we lived together in the same campus. Dr. Nguirane is an associate professor of Anglophone Studies at Université des Antilles in Martinique. He holds a PhD from Université de Poitiers and has taught at several prestigious institutions, including Université de Limoges, Université d'Orléans, and Arcadia University in Canada. His scholarship is decisively anchored in the study of African diaspora, Pan-African intellectual networks, and Black political and intellectual traditions. His work crosses geographical and disciplinary boundaries, engaging with the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, while also contributing significantly to the ongoing and diaspora studies. Dr. actively participates in public intellectual discourse from U.S. Parliament. He also serves as a co-editor of the Journal of African and African Diasporic Studies at the Harriet Tubman Institute at York University. In today's talk, Dr. Nguirane will explore how African-American intellectual traditions have integrated into French Anglophone studies, while also examining the complexities of engaging with racial paradigms in a scholarly environment that often resists the use of race as an analytical category. His talk will further highlight how recent global movements have rekindled scholarly interest in Black American thought in the French-speaking world. We are truly honored to have you with us today, and I would like to acknowledge your intellectual generosity. Thanks once again for accepting to be the speaker of this great event. The audience is pleased and ready to listen to you now. You have 40 to 45 minutes to give your work. Thank you for your attention. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. Do you allow me to share my document so that I can start it? So, okay.
Okay, just give me a second. Oh, okay, perfect.
Let me make it, I just wanted to make it like, okay. Good morning, everyone. I am connecting from Martinique in the Caribbean, and it is now 6:20 in the morning. I would like to thank my dear colleague, Dr. Alassane Dia, for inviting me and for finding the right time for this conference, because we have very teaching loads, and sometimes it is so difficult to find the way to do it. So we had a great discussion, and this is the right time for this webinar. I would like to thank the International American Studies Association for such an initiative. I would say that I have been tricked. I have been tricked into this webinar because I was not expecting to have so many people showing up. And this is quite interesting. And I might say that this is a sign for me to join the association and bring my contribution. So thank you also for the English department for doing this and bringing the student to contribute and learn from those who are connecting from everywhere in the world. And what I appreciate about knowledge is understanding, sharing, but also connecting with others. That's what knowledge flourish. So when it comes to this topic, it really connects to a lot of layers, I would say, because I have been a student in the French system from my own country, that is Senegal. When I came to France, I did the same studies, that is American civilization. And as a student, I started questioning what I have been studying, what was connected to what I studied, trying to understand what does it mean to have a curriculum, what does it mean to have inclusion, what diversity means and how it is reflected, who are the authors I'm studying, and what do they say about my culture and my history. Those questions I started early when I was a student. And then when I studied a PhD, I had the chance to come to stay in Canada back in 2011, 2012. I was participating in an exchange program with my university. And in Canada, I discovered the word multiculturalism. And that word did not sound familiar to me before I went to Canada. And I started reading. I started meeting other scholars, and other words come on my way. Coming from a French system, you're more likely to understand what republic means, what universalism means. Post-colonialism was a word that was familiar to me, but not multiculturalism. So when I started to understand those concepts, when I had an interest in the knowledge of, I would say, the history of ideas, I started questioning what words means. How are they forged? Where are they forged? By whom? How do they travel from one place to the other? And if they travel from one place to the other, do they keep the same essence?
Excuse me. Just give me a second. Let me just mute you all, and you can unmute yourself. Could you please unmute and continue now, please? Sorry for this.
Good morning, everybody. Can somebody hear me? Hello, good morning, everybody. It's Mr. Ndao, a third semester student. Can somebody hear me?
Good morning. Now, please. Please, guys, the conference is going. Do not talk, please. Sorry for this. Please, guys, mute your microphones, okay? Go on.
Okay, thank you. So, as I said, I started questioning the words, where they are forged by whom, and if they travel from one place to the other, do they keep the same essence? Then comes my study of Pan-Africanism. That is the topic of my PhD. When I studied Pan-Africanism, I was not quite interested in the movement itself, the political movement for the unity of African people, but I go deeper to understand what the word means. An intellectual movement? What are the ideas that reflect Pan-Africanism? What are the practices, the multiple practices, not one, but multiple practices beyond the Atlantic? That was the questions that led me to the Black Studies movement. When I started the questioning of the Black Studies movement, I came to understand the different African American authors, the founders, those who forged the concept, and why they were forging those concepts, and who they were defending. What was the meaning of those words? I ask a lot of questions because I question. So from the Black Studies movement, I published an article that led me to the word multiculturalism, that led me to the word critical race theory. And all of that has given me more interest to question the history of ideas. And this is the topic of my talk. I would also like to remind you that I have been teaching in the French system since 2013. I started as an assistant professor, and now I'm an associate professor. So I know the system because I am in the system. I teach American civilization every year. I know the curriculum and what are the percentage of African American intellectual traditions. This is another important element to consider when it comes to the topic. So when I started questioning the topic, it was necessary to go back to the foundational institutions that led to American studies, because we cannot understand the Black intellectual tradition, how they are translated in France, without understanding the institution that received them, that welcomed them, because they are institutionalized. They are not in a militant movement. They are not marginalized. Maybe they can be depoliticized. I know we have read Edward Said mentioning traveling theories. When they move from one place to the other, they can be received, welcomed, they can be depoliticized, they can be reconceptualized, they can be revitalized. So in terms of American studies in France, it is not a discipline itself that is really homogeneous and that we can define and really point out. It is in every discipline. You can find it in political science, you can find them in history, you can find them in geography, and right now in geopolitical issues, because that is trendy. So La Maison Française is a well-known house, known for welcoming researchers, known for bridging those who forge knowledge. It still exists. It was created in 1913. It is quite interesting to point out here that the 1930s was 1 year before the end of First World War. And the US was primarily pro-German on the side of Germany. And France was also working to rekindle its relationship with the US. And knowledge was one of the tools to bring that friendship alive again. So this is one first institution to take into account, as it is quite interesting when it comes to American studies. And then the Foundation des États-Unis. The Foundation des États-Unis still exists today. And they do also that work connecting scholars across the borders, but also sharing their cultures at the same time, making sure that all sides study their cultures. And do not forget that the Fulbright programs have played a very important role when it comes to American studies in France, and they still exist today. They provide scholarship for other, like my colleagues, to go and stay somewhere in the US and study and do research. And this is one of the elements. So I needed to point out those two elements that are.
Please unmute yourself, Doctor.
Thank you. So I just mentioned the French house. I just mentioned the Foundation des États-Unis, created in 1930, and later the Fulbright programs that opened the doors for academic exchanges. And now it is quite impossible for me to talk about the African American intellectual traditions in France without pointing out the echoes of Black internationalism in France. Because Black internationalism in France, I might say this is the main site. This is the hub that introduced Blackness to France. Let's remember that France was a colonial metropolis, as London was, as Brussels was, as Lisbon was. And those colonial metropolises, they welcomed radical voices, Pan-African voices. They welcomed many intellectuals of the diaspora. And in Paris, you have the meeting ground of African intellectuals, Caribbean intellectuals, and American intellectuals. Paris was also a site of exile, but exile does not mean being marginal. We have some authors in mind who are from the United States, exiled in Paris, who were not in a marginal position, even if they were fleeing injustice from the US, they were bridging the different corners, bridging Africa, the Caribbean, and the US. And in Paris, they met other intellectuals, and from that meeting emerged an intellectual tradition. And that intellectual tradition would pave the way for France to understand what Blackness means. Even if there was some resistance, resistance existed. Resistance to Blackness as something that would really not fit with the Republican idea of unity, and race not being a concept that is recognized and should be pushed out in order to work on assimilation. That was one of the French principles. So the Harlem Renaissance is quite interesting to understand because it connected the writers. What is interesting about the Harlem Renaissance in terms of the topic that I'm tackling is that the Caribbean and African intellectuals in Paris, they were reading authors of the Harlem Renaissance. They were embracing the affirmation of the Black beauty and dignity championed by this movement. But at the same time, they were theorizing Blackness in a Francophone framework. That was quite interesting. And negritude became the first French theoretical framework for understanding the Black condition directly from Harlem. This is quite interesting, but also the African intellectuals in Paris, I might say Alain Diop, we already know him, of Présence Africaine, connected with those African American intellectuals. And the review du Monde Noir, Présence Africaine, L'étudiant noir, Légitime Défense, all of these papers and reviews, they were giving voice to the marginalized. They were legitimizing the voices that was not heard. And that is quite interesting for the progression of the Black intellectual tradition that was, in fact, Black internationalism. Let me clarify a little bit, because when it comes to Pan-Africanism and Black internationalism, there is sometimes confusion. We can use them sometimes separately. We can use them as they mean the same thing. Most of my Black American colleagues, and the scholarship shows it, might use Black internationalism because Black internationalism might be more inclusive somehow, because most of the women who played a very important role in anti-colonial movements, the civil rights movements, they were not included, mostly erased. And Black internationalism did not miss those chapters. And there are so many great works from African American scholars who did mention the Nadal sisters. The Nadal sisters are from Martinique, where I'm speaking from. They have played a very important role. Nadal was a journalist. She was a writer. She was an intellectual. What she did was translating the works of African Americans to the French audience. That's what she was doing. And she was also organizing like a meetings, intellectual meetings between those intellectuals in his house he created. And that was quite interesting to keep in mind. And the Nadal sisters were not well known. In the history of negritude, a lot of people, even here in Martinique, consider that there is an injustice. It is male dominated, And because of that male domination, their contribution was not taken into account. And today, there are books, articles that really show how they were contributing to this great intellectual tradition, and the archives shows it. So let me move on to René Marin. René Marin was also someone who won the Nobel Prize in 1921. It is meaningful, maybe symbolic, but it really influenced generations of anti-colonial activists and writers. And all of these elements that I'm mentioning, they were bringing Black American question into the legitimate French intellectual sphere, because the French intellectual sphere at the time was not very open. The borders were very tight, and anything that was Black, anything that was like considered to be essentialized was to be taken seriously. And just an example, when the Pan-African Congress took place in 1919, we usually consider it as the first, but it is not the first. So 1919, the Pan-African Congress in Paris, it was not very representative because most of the African American intellectuals and activists who wanted to attend, they have the visa refused because at the time Clemenceau did not was considering that they were bringing the Black American problem dilemma to on French soil. That was not the best time then to welcome those activists. So moving to the institutionalization now. I came back again now to the system because those intellectual traditions, they have to be translated into a wider system. That is the Anglophone field of study. So the institutionalization is a long process. It is a long process, and most of these institutions you see here, they still exist, and they are doing great work because they are working in teaching, but also in the national exams for teacher training. And the first one was la Société des Anglicistes de l'Enseignement Supérieur. It still exists. It brings together colleagues who teach civilization, specialists of Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia. Others, they teach American civilization. Others, they teach literature. They have phonetics, linguistics, all issues pertaining to English, they cover it in this great association. They have an annual meeting every year. They move from one university to the other. And they have to pay their membership. And they also work to help the Ministry of Education in terms of designing the curriculum for the competition that is the very competitive exam that is agrégation. So they work on that field and they still exist today. And that institution works closely with l'Association Française des Études Américaines. That one was created in 1967 and it created a review. The review was Revue Française d'études américaines. This is one of the oldest reviews. And most of my teachers of American civilization, they are known to this review. They have published great work. And we were introduced very early to this review. When I studied my master's at the University of Poitiers, I have read quite many articles from this review because we were given a required reading list to understand what was published and to understand different aspects of the US society. Now, in 1980 was also the creation of the Center for North American Studies at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. So that is the School of Higher Education and Social Sciences. That school is known for being multidisciplinary. They welcome many researchers because when it comes to civilization, there is one great question, and we're still debating about it in the French system. Because the debate starts with the name civilization. Let me tell you that anytime I participated in a conference in Canada, and they ask me, what do I study? What is my specialty? If I pronounce the word civilization, it is a shock to them, because civilization, it really connects to imperialism. It connects to the civilizing mission. It connects to Kipling, the white man's burden. So all of these connections make the word civilization not welcome. But civilization is a field of study that is at the crossroads of political science, anthropology, geography. We tapped a little bit on geopolitics. And that's why most of my colleagues who are based in Senegal and other countries, when they see me talk about other issues, they ask me the question, well, if I remember well, did you study English? And I say, yes. So they did not expect me to talk about other issues that is not in the field of study, that is English, because English is necessarily connected to the grammar, the mechanics of the language. So the word civilization had an epistemological question, because unlike history, unlike sociology, civilization was not considered a discipline, but a field of study only. And history was building a wall, I would say. This is me talking. Building a wall to make sure that you are studying civilization, you are not qualified enough to trample on our ground. So stay away. You were not trained as a historian. There's no way for you to study the US history. But we have an argument against them, that is, we can directly take from the primary sources in English. We don't need to read translations in French to understand what is going on. I still have this debate with other colleagues who are studying law. When I talk about the US Constitution, they look at me and asking questions whether I'm legitimate enough to talk about the US Constitution or the founding fathers, because in law they studied, but they studied in French. So this is the debate that is going on. So the word civilization is also semantic, because the choice of the word civilization was seen as referring to imperialism. I just mentioned it. It is also pedagogical, because many historians, they do not understand why history courses are taught by non-specialists. So just to give you the state of the debate that is going on in France since the 1980s, whether we are legitimate enough as civilizationists to study history. So, but also there was another difficulties, because I'm moving to really let you see how the African American intellectual tradition is translated into the field of Anglophone studies, but via the English departments, because these are the sites that welcome them. So the English department have another tension. The other tension was there was a group of scholars who were, I would say, there's some kind of, they were reluctant about American imperialism. Some kind of American imperialism. And a segment of the French intelligence, they adopted a critical stance towards the American way of life. And until today, there are some specialists in terms of geopolitics who have been theorizing about the US as an empire, the empire who succeeded the British Empire. So the Colossus, to talk like Niall Ferguson, who is a great historian of empire and who was criticized for his documentaries, mentioning that empire was not all bad, but somehow positive. And we tend to focus most on the sins of empire and not the goods of empire. And Bruce Julay, he's another American intellectual, also brought another layer of controversy, that is to say that recolonization should happen again. So the English departments are the hubs where we study the African American intellectual tradition. Now let me provide examples, concrete examples of how they translate into that before moving, because the first step would be teaching and the second step would focus on research. And that is the most controversial aspect. So the field of civilization and literature, as they translate into in France, mostly they are into what we call English language, literature, and civilization. Here we call it LLCL. And we study the Mayflower. I have been teaching the Mayflower since like 2013. I have been teaching colonial America. In the first semester, we're teaching colonial America from the Mayflower to the Civil War. We also teach the civil rights movement. We teach the New Deal. So as you see it in bold type, the civil rights movement is one of the most taught, would say, issue when it comes to the African American experience. So the teaching of the African American tradition is always
Please. Please, guys.
okay. The teaching of the African American intellectual tradition is always in line.
Put yourself, doctor, and continue.
The teaching of African American intellectual tradition are always in line with the overall trend in LLC programs. So they are generally subsumed within thematic studies of ethnic and studies and inequalities. Most of the time, they are generalized in order to avoid essentialism, in order to avoid to study the African American experience separately. So they study the US society, African Americans within the United States as part of the United States. So the particularism is mostly silenced and not really highlighted, and that is still a topic of debate. So this is an excerpt of a syllabus that come from one of the universities that have a great English department. And I would say this is a university that has an example. In terms of teaching American civilization, they have the greatest laboratory in terms of research. They have so many scholars who paved the way for the study of the US society. And maybe they have more financial resources, and they are in the capital, that is Paris. So as you can see it here, this is one excerpt of the curriculum. You can easily spot whether the African American intellectual tradition is considered or not. It might be implicit, but students, most of the time when they do these courses, they have some episodes that pertain to the African American experience or slavery included. So this is how it appears in the first example. Let's move to a second example. This is the second example of Université Le Mans, and this is very recent. As you can see it here, they are studying American civilization from the federal period. And what is being considered here is they are considering the end of the 19th century from the perspective of labor history. So the undeniable progress of the United States, two words that point out to African Americans who would be Blacks or maybe immigrants. So this is the perspective of minorities, because we have minority studies in the US, ethnic studies in the US, but also we have area studies. And this is not directly from the Black or African American or Africana studies way of approaching the issue of Blackness or race. So this is one example. Let's take another example that is from the university I studied. This is from the university I studied, and this is one of my colleagues who did a PhD focusing on the residential schools in Canada. So this is a course. And one element that I have spotted is the civil rights movement, the only element that translates that echoes the Black American way of life or contribution would be the civil rights movement. Or maybe the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, 1970s that can be reflective of the African American experience. So these are examples that I wanted you to see. And this is an excerpt of literature. An excerpt of literature as also a dominant field of study in France. And American literature is mostly taught focusing on the periods or the movement, going to the transcendentalism all the way to postmodernism. Mostly it is studied that way. And if we follow that timeline, we are less likely to include more contribution from African American writers. The Harlem Renaissance is mostly considered in that timeline because it has been an episode and quite difficult to skip it. But also, we study the writers who exiled because that is so, it is passionate to study it. So it is part of the study of the lost generation, like Fitzgerald, who went to Paris, and Steinbeck, they studied alone. So this is one example. And now, to finish with this example, let me show the follow-up of the description of the course that I just mentioned. These are the writers that tells us something. Chimamanda, I'm not sure if I'm to include it in African American literature, but he's definitely in the field of Black studies. He's definitely in the field of African studies. So James Baldwin, definitely reflective of the tradition. Frederick Douglass, the slave narratives, and Colson Whitehead. And he is one of the novelists whose work is definitely reflective of that intellectual tradition he inherited. So these are examples that I wanted to share with you so that you can see if you are not familiar with the French system. And this is another excerpt that I have used with my students because it was not me choosing it, but we have a board for the national exam that is CAPES. And each year they produce topics, the examples that we should be working on, preparing our students all the way to the national exam that took place 2 weeks ago. This was about the Black Power. And this is one excerpt among others put together for students to reflect on the African American experience. So this is another example of an excerpt of the examination session 2022. As you can see, the shadow that is reflective of history. Ruby Bridge, the little girl who wanted to go to school, but segregation stopped her not to go to school. And she was determined to be educated. She was determined to have a voice and to be a member of the society. She was to have a test of what America was preaching, that is equality and democracy. So this is quite interesting as a document. But also a last document to show how that tradition can be widespread, but not directly showing from the words we draw from the Black studies tradition. So this is an illustration of Maya Angelou that was also included in the session 2022. And our students, when they are provided with these documents, they have to show their understanding of it. They have to understand the paratextual elements, but also they have to understand who is Maya Angelou, what her writings are, and how this document is connected to another document. We call this course text and image, and we work on iconographic documents. So now move on to the terrain that is more conflictual, that is the terrain of research. This is the terrain of Black French studies. This is the word, not me using it, but that has been forged by other scholars. One of them is showing up, that is Mabula Sumaoro. Mabula is a great scholar who is doing great work in terms of translating the Black American experience for French audiences. And there are backlashes mostly because it is not quite easy to preach these kind of issues in public because it is an offense, I would say, to the unity of republicanism and universalism, what brings people together. And differences should be not showed up, and it has to be colorblind. We don't see color here. So Pap Njai, that's the name we pronounce it here in the French system, but as the Senegalese, we don't pronounce it Njai, it's Njai. So Pap Njai is one of the scholars who paved the way for the study of the African American traditions. From his PhD, books he published on the civil rights movement, but also La Condition Noire. La Condition Noire is a great book, a book that made the headlines in France. And what is interesting about the book is it was, I would say, a translation of the perspectives we know in the US, in France. That was the interest of the book. The perspectives we already know in France, Blackness as understood in America, and now how it translates into the French system. It is very debatable, and we'll see later. Mabula published his book 4 years ago. And the book was a reflection on her identity, but also her trajectory as a scholar. Mabula spent a lot of years in the United States, and she is an associate professor at the University of Tours. She was associate professor way before me. I was a PhD student when she was a teacher at the University of Tours, and until today. She's a public figure appearing on many media and talking about Blackness and all that pertains to the US. And Mabula and others are mostly those who are considered as bringing the Black American question or dilemma to France. So they are the one who cross borders with the concept, and they mostly are not quite well understood. Let's move on to this aspect that is quite interesting, that is the Black Studies concept. I mean the Black Studies concept that were drawn not voluntarily, but they echo the concept known to the Black Studies movement. And one of those concepts is multiculturalism. Multiculturalism translates as communautarisme in France. We all know what it means. There is one French intellectual who says, if we were to define communautarism, it would mean we always have to reject it. If we were to choose a definition, the definition would only be we always have to reject it. So to say how the word was not welcome, and the media, they picked up the word and it became very negative, and anyone who understands the word was not even ready to listen. No listening. It was to reject it whatsoever. So another word that is the American racial problems were considered as French social problems, as the book showed here by Didier Fassin. Didier Fassin and Eric Fassin, they are sociologists and very connected to Anglophone studies. They really make things, their scholarship is quite interesting to understand how American problems are understood in France and how they translate. Denis Lacorne is also one of those scholars who has published profusely on these issues. And in their work, the word race, multiculturalism is part of it. And they confront the word race, they confront the word multiculturalism to universalism. How universalism as the host welcome the guest, that is multiculturalism, and race. Race is banned in the in the French Constitution, pardon. Race is banned in the French Constitution. It does not exist. And way before it was banned, there was many definition and many reminders that race is just a concept and it is not scientific. But the scholars that use it, they want to use it as an analytical tool. analytical tool to say that there are some issues happening, like the urban riots in France in 2005 under Sarkozy. They say this is a message, and that would mean that race is something meaningful. And if we do consider race as a factor, it would lead to conclusions. However, it is rejected. And Didier Fassin and Eric Fassin, they want to understand that now I think it is time that we use the word race, because the problems we see look like the race problems we see in America. The race riots in Chicago are the same picture that they see in France, and they wanted to really use race and blackness as a way of understanding the sociology of these problems. So let me try to move. I see the time moving. So another Black studies concept that is so controversial right now, that is critical race theory. I published an article that is entitled From Multiculturalism to Critical Race Theory. And my thesis, my research question was understanding how the two words translate in the field of education, how they were welcomed, what are the debates around multiculturalism and critical race theory. Multiculturalism is labeled as divisive. Critical race theory is labeled as essentialist. So both concepts are connected, and they come from the Black studies box of concepts and theories. They are confrontational. They challenge the system. They want to deconstruct. They are not into integration, but they want to deconstruct the layers, the dominant aspect of the education system. And it sparked a lot of interest in the legal departments, because the book that is here, it is not from my colleagues in the English department, but colleagues from the law departments who showed very interest. Because of what? Because critical race theory, it emerged from the law department. Derek Bell, who is an African-American, is the architect of this movement. She was questioning whether the legislation of the civil rights movement was still valid. That was the question he was asking. And he was saying that the civil rights legislation was hiding what he calls some convergence interest. If we validate this aspect that is radical, it's because we see that it is not dangerous enough. We just let it go, and this is some convergence interest. That was the way he was questioning from a legal perspective. So I'm heading to the way. This is another concept that is well known in France right now, that is charge raciale. Charge raciale is mostly attributed to Mabula Soumahoro, but there's another researcher from Quebec who is also credited for this concept. Charge raciale directly leads to racial battle fatigue that is already in the US. What does it mean? Is that mental state, that psychological, I would say, mindset that lead you to explain, to justify, to explain to others your actions in order for them to understand without hurting them. And that is a burden. It is very heavy to try to explain every day why this is this, why that is that. And the way you study, the way you explain it becomes a burden, and it is a fatigue. At the beginning, it started in Utah, the University of Utah. And that professor, who is an African-American, questioning racial fatigue, was understanding that African-American students in predominantly white campuses were facing this racial fatigue. They were to explain their presence. They were to justify themselves. They did not have self-esteem. All of that combined led him to the concept of racial fatigue, and now it is part of the concept of Black studies. So I'm heading to the way. This is another book that is quite interesting that shows how the African American intellectual tradition are translated into the space, the French landscape. There is a book translated by Mabula Sumahor. So translation is a hub. It is a site for the transition of words, concept, ideas, experiences, contributions from one location to the other. And translation as an activity is one thing that is very common in the French system, and most of these books are being translated, and they are classical books. And these most interesting books that you already know, The Racial Contract. It is a book by Charles Mills, who was questioning the racial social contract, philosophically speaking, and it led to the translation of the book in 2023. So we spent a lot of years waiting for the book to be translated. I have read the book in English before, but for the French audiences, that was something new they discovered. So that's why you already see the distances or the gap between the French scholarship and the English scholarship in terms of Black issues. So this is my last point, so that I respect the time that was given to me. This is my last aspect of the talk. This is the Black Lives Matter movement. We all heard the slogan that replaced many other slogans. There was freedom now, there was Black is beautiful, there was Black power, and today Black Lives Matter movement, because police was killing. There was a lot of boycotts, manifestations that reminds the tactics of the civil rights movement, but the difference is this movement is not connected to one person. And this movement is very much in many forms. The voices are not one, but many voices. And the movement traveled fast. I'm not saying that the civil rights movement did not translate, because we understudied how the civil rights movement connected with the anti-colonial movements. But there are some books coming now to really see the connection between Martin Luther King and the Pan-African movement. It existed. So we usually study the civil rights movement within the US context, and it is US-centered mostly. So the civil rights, the Black Lives Matter movement, you see the translation of the book by Yamata Taylor. The book was translated into French. And Pap Njai, that I just mentioned, who is the architect of Black French Studies, published a book, De l'Esclavage à Black Lives Matter. That was, this is a proof of the renewed interest in African American intellectual tradition. This is a great conference that took place at the University of Paul Valéry in Montpellier that brought a lot of scholars. And what is interesting about the conference was they brought up the word systemic racism. The word comes from Stokely Carmichael, who theorized systemic racism in order to move from the classic definition of racism as prejudice. He was saying that racism was rooted in American institutions, and unless we really deconstruct those institutions or really do a radical transformation, there is no way we can move beyond racism and see equality translate as a reality and hold America true to her word. So this is the very interesting concept from the American intellectual tradition coming to France, and is still used today. But I would tell you that there is still resistance when it comes to the relevance of this word, because racism is mostly defined as some isolated cases. Yesterday or next month, or last month, I met someone who was looking at me and considering me as, or labeling me as. That is usually the mechanism we use to define racism. And finally, how scholars in the field move with all these barriers when it comes to race and working in a French system that is really resistant to the use of the word race, as Dr. Dia mentioned in his presentation. So Republican universalism, as we know it in France, casts suspicion on any approach based on racial categories, which complicates the importation of paradigms that make race a central category of analysis. There's still resistance. The lack of ethno-racial statistics, because in France there is no ethno-racial statistic. It is not allowed. It is forbidden. We are not allowed to do it as a scholar or anyone. So that's why the concept of positive discrimination, affirmative action, it made the headlines in France because political science department, Sciences Po Paris, was copying, I would say, the initiatives of the US, that is, to welcome a number of Black students from the neighborhoods to have the chance to have the undergraduate studies at Sciences Po Paris. Sciences Po considered as a higher institution and a privileged institution, I would say. So it is quite interesting to understand that as Anglophone studies fall under the purview of foreign language, that is langue étrangère appliquée, it keeps them within a framework of national specialization rather than an interdisciplinary approach like American area studies or Canadian ethnic studies. And finally, there is a mistrust of what is perceived as ideological transfer, the criticism leveled at Black studies for being activist rather than scientific. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, colleagues, this was something that I wanted to share with you, and that come from my experience, from my readings, and from my little understanding of a broad field of study, of a broad intellectual tradition that cannot be contained in 45 minutes. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your attention. And I'm very open to have a discussion, to get your contribution and any suggestion from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nguirane. Thank you so very much. I can see the applause from the audience, so it means it was very interactive. It's very nice. So I would like once again, to acknowledge, the presence of everyone. We are very sorry. Many people are asking to join on, but it seems that the Zoom has reached its limit, so there is no way, but still people are asking to enter. So just to comment, I will go very roughly and try to help maybe those who missed the beginning of what Dr. Nguirane has said about this very, interesting topic. So he first started with curriculum, this issue of curriculum diversity, culture in history, multicultural in some, English-speaking countries, and how we translate into the French context. Taking as a case study his experience in Canada, where he said that it was not very easy at the very beginning to integrate communities that has a different conception of what seems to be his specialty, but he had to fit into that context to find his way. And Dr. Nguirane also talked about Black Studies movement, raised his awareness a lot, and that's where his passion came. And he became curiously familiar with famous African-American writers and scholars who urged him to dig into the question and come up with very solid knowledge. As you see through his presentation, he is very relaxed with the question, and it's because it's his specialty. I congratulate him so very much on that. It was very interactive. He mentions 1930 as a landmark because that was the period where the whole world experienced the First World War. And what marked it was the foundation, the Fondation des États-Unis in 1930, which echoes Black. And also he connected to very significant literary movement, the Harlem Renaissance, and how it resonated with the French conception of, Anglophone studies. He also connected it to American Blackness in the Paris of Richard Wright, and of James Baldwin. Talking about Richard Wright and James Baldwin in African-American literature is something very important. Current generations and former generations, they all know what these luminaries did in the Harlem Renaissance. So he also talked about the significance of interesting reviews like Revue du Monde Noir, a Présence Africaine, with the contribution of Alioune Diop and L'Étudiant Noir. Our students have learned in the first year the Negritude movement. And if they connect the Harlem Renaissance and the Negritude movement, they know what role these reviews have played. Because Paris was kind of a foyer, it was a center where the Black diaspora met to have a kind of race awareness, a sensitization. Important figure was mentioned, Nadal, who was a journalist from Martinique, not very popular at that time, but who contributed in translating this kind of intellectual meetings and to expose it to the audience. And he also mentioned René Moron in the Pan-African Congress of 1919 in Paris, showing that it was not only the beginning, but there was something previous that marked the history. And very important that Cheikh Nguirane mentioned was the institutionalization of American studies within the French Academy. It is important to talk about it. He mentioned in 1960, La Société des Anglicistes de l'Enseignement du Supérieur. It means higher education, association, scholars. And in 1967, Max, Association Française d'Études Américaines. In 1976, Revue Française d'Études Américaines. 1980, Centre d'Études du Monde. So all these, someone who is very familiar with French studies or Anglophone studies knows that things are going progressively very well. And Cheikh put it very coherently and chronologically. He also mentioned the role that English department played, and that's very important. As he said, he first, based on his experience as a doctoral student, as an emerging scholar, once in Canada and in an English-speaking country, traveling French-speaking country, the transition is already there. And showing how English departments sometimes tailor their programs, talking about cutting-edge curriculum issue, the relevance, orientation, ideology. Talking about civilization, how civilization may fit or not fit what people expect it to be in some contexts. So it means in his analysis that it has an epistemological orientation. So English language, literature, and civilization were in the center of translating this tradition, teaching African-American literary tradition. And he talked about sample syllabi to address one dealing with origins of a nation, Native America, colonization in the early United States. So he also mentioned some required texts to be familiar with in the context of intellectual traditions. He mentioned writers like James Baldwin, Francis Scott Fitzgerald, Frederick Douglass, Maya Angelou, telling about the importance of Black studies and Black studies tradition. And then he moved to the Black French studies, how translating Black American experiences for French audiences were challenging. He talked about the works of his scholar Pape Ndiaye, one of the pioneers of the promotion of African-American studies in the French-speaking world, mentioning La Condition Noire as a recommended text to read because it collected essays about that. He also moved to something very important about Black studies concept, theories in French Anglophone studies, theorizing and commenting on American multiculturalism as a French communautarism, and American racial problems as French social problems, mentioning urban 25, and also dealing with universalism principles contrasting with the lived experiences of Blackness. So Cheikh moved then to a controversial concept, which is critical race theory, and as a contested paradigm in French Anglophone studies. To him, racial Black fatigue, which is translated into French as charges raciales, was something challenging in terms of pedagogy and how to deal with it in the academia. It was a serious issue in the academia, particularly in the context of the United States, and Cheikh is right. If you see today, America is not allowed to teach some sensitive texts related to slavery everywhere. Yeah. Red states do not accept sometimes universities to deal with some texts. I remember a colleague in the University of Louisville who told me, how do you teach Frederick Douglass or African-American literature in Western Washington? It's because in Louisville, it's not allowed. Another colleague told me in Florida, he has no chance to deal with African-American pioneers. No, it's because it's a red state that does not want sometimes people to deal with these kind of race issues. So he finished with the Black Lives Matters movement, which is an attention-grabbing slogan that has expanded tremendously very fast around the world. So for him, it is a renewed interest in African-American intellectual traditions. The Black Lives Matters has expanded very quickly, and the scholars engage with racial paradigms in intellectual landscape that resist the use of race as a categorical, analytical category. So roughly, these are the points that Cheikh mentioned in his talk. Once again, I congratulate him and I thank him so much. I would like to acknowledge and to let Professor Bilgi and Stefan, that big authorities of our institution was there, the provost of my university, the vice presidents in charge of research, and the other one in charge of pedagogy were here. They say hi to everyone. And I thank colleagues for the attention. There are many, many, many colleagues across the world who are here online. I cannot see all it. So I think now it is time to move to question and answers. We open, now the debate. It will be easier to post your questions in the chat, and some who desire may raise their hand, and then we give them the floor. So maybe to go quickly, the first one can raise their hand, we give them the floor, and it will be more practical also to post in the chat your questions. It will be easier by the time we pick those who raise their hand.
Dr. Jia, could you please take a question from Dr. Georgie Toth? He had posted it in the chat box. Could you please check? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I see a question about
the speaker,
right? Dr. Todd, right?
Yeah, no, yes. The speaker could please read the question.
Yes, Dr. Todd said, I wonder if Josephine Baker's presence in art and art in France helped facilitate the transfer of African-American intellectual traditions to the Francophone African world. If you wanted to, would you have the freedom to recenter your teaching of American civilization around African-American intellectual and cultural traditions? This is a move that American Studies has advocated for. How would such an experiment change understanding of your students about American civilization? Should I repeat, Chef?
Yeah, I have read the question. I have read it. I see it right now. So I have been reading the great question from Dr. George. I don't know if I pronounce it well. I'm quite interested about Josephine Baker. So yeah, definitely she had a platform at the time, and that platform did have an impact. That is to really raise awareness, whether it was positive or negative. But Josephine Baker there's some, I would say, there's most of my colleagues and others who work on Blackness, they have a mixed understanding or analysis of Josephine Baker, because there's the word capture that comes to mind, captured. So what she was supposed to embody was not really connected to her identity and background. She did play a role. She was conscious of what she was doing. A lot of my former, those who are very experienced in understanding it, told me when I was a student that Josephine Baker was very aware of what she was doing. She was not being used, but others would say she was used as the, like, for the dominant system, but also her personality, dancing, using those derogatory look, also did pave the way for the racism. I would say it was normalizing racism somehow. She was brought in the pantheon as recognized as a well-known figure, and France was paying tribute to her contribution. And there was resistance from the far right France to say that she did not deserve it. But from the left, she deserved it because she really take a stand for the Republic. She was dancing around Europe, but she was mocked for the way she looked. So, but I can say she had a platform. She did like publicize the Black question in France, because she was the only Black woman at the time who could be getting into those closed circles. And that's something she deserved. And I would say she did contribute, of course. And when it comes to, you said, if I were to teach African American civilization my way, you know, in the French system, it is mostly centralized. It is mostly centralized because I work in a school of education, but also I have to teach in other departments. In a school of education, we prepare those who are taking the national exam. And every year we are provided the program, and I have to follow that program like my other colleagues. And this year we have as program the 1920s US, a very interesting program. We studied the 1920s, and they took the exam 2 weeks ago. They were studying the Prohibition, they were studying the flappers, they were studying, my students, they were studying also the Harlem Renaissance, the emergence of jazz music, but also how modernity met tradition, how the Prohibition led to more control and criminality, and how the 1920s reflect the 2020 today, and how the novel by Scott Fitzgerald is very relevant in today's world. And also my students were seeing some echoes of Fitzgerald in the way our president looks like, not to mention names. Okay.
Okay, I move to the next. Interesting about Josephine Baker. Maybe it's because I'm in the Francophone context. The first time I met Josephine Baker was in Western, in her performance. Maybe my reception was a little bit different from American receptions, but she talked a bit about, you know, her being a dancer in Europe and how she was conceived in the past and now what it is. And I think there is a big trend on now what it is exactly. Yeah. There are misconceptions sometimes. There are other issues like that. Yeah.
And,
I move to the question of Professor Bilge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Professor Bilge said another interesting point would be to include African American feminism and women writers into the canon.
Exactly.
Some have been included, yet there are issues that are discussed beyond intersectionality or womanism.
Exactly. So I think like I don't know how I came to miss that point, because there was two illustrations that were included in the presentation, and Dr. Dia can prove it. The first document that I sent included a book that is entitled Black Feminism. Because when it comes to Black intellectual tradition, Black feminism is most reflected in France. Intersectionalism finds its way in France. Intersectionality, it finds its way. Crenshaw traveled to France, and her books was translated into French also, most of her books. And it resonates in France. And the backlash mostly come from that area of Black feminism, because there is the word wokeism. Wokeism resonates in the system here. And anyone who studied Blackness, Pan-Africanism, who are interested in all those multiple discrimination, sexism, all of that, you are mostly labeled as being part of the wokist movement. So this is one of the issues, but Black feminism is definitely one of the reflection of the Black intellectual tradition. And Mabula Sumaworo, that I mentioned, is one of those scholars who work on the issue. There are other scholars also who are currently in the US who have been colleagues of mine who moved to the US. They are studying those connections between the Northern Sisters and the connection in the US. I mentioned it in my talk that when it comes to Black internationalism, Black women are most likely included. In the history of Pan-Africanism, the Pan-African narrative, we missed the chapter when it comes to women, and it has been acknowledged by one of the greatest historians, that is Hakim Adi. Hakim Adi, he is in London. He did recognize later in his scholarship that indeed women were not included. And what is strange, that is the archives shows something else, the archives. One of the women who is at the foundation of the word Pan-Africanism was from South Africa, whose name is Alice Kinloch. Alice Kinloch, she was a lawyer living in London. And she was close to R. Sylvester Williams. R. Sylvester Williams, who is credited for the word, he is from Trinidad. And he went to South Africa. And initially, the conference was convened to advocate for the land grabbing going on in South Africa. That was initially the objective of the conference. But they added other issues to the minutes of the conference, because there was Haiti represented, there was other African countries represented. That made the conference broader. But initially, that was the land issue, and Alice Kinloch was behind it. To finish, another great feminine figure that is mostly forgotten, that is Mary Bethune. Mary Bethune, but also Queen Mother Moore. Queen Mother Moore. Queen Mother Moore is well known. She is the mother, I would say, of the reparation movement. The word reparation comes from her. There is a book, a very interesting book by Ana Araujo. Ana Araujo, she is a historian from Brazil and at Howard University. She wrote a great book entitled The Reparation Movement, and she is interested in the intellectual history of the word reparation, and it comes from that woman. They had a movement that extends from the US to Ethiopia. The line goes to the US to Ethiopia, and they were organizing. There's the woman, the wife of Marcus Garvey. History did not write her contribution. There were others, the list is long. And this is part of one of the projects I'm working on, to try to include the chapters into the history of Pan-Africanism.
All right, thank you. So thank you for that. Yeah, and as he said, yes, I can testify that his presentation was exhaustive enough, included. As you know, also in our curriculum, we talked about curriculum. Usually in female African-American writing, our students are very much familiar with writers like Alice Walker, who coined the word womanism, and Maya Angelou, Zora Neale Hurston, and Toni Morrison. Our students are very much familiar with it. And these, iconic African-American writers are taught in the curriculum. Now I move to the question of Professor Stefan Brandt. He said, I would like to ask about what seems to me an important conceptual backdrop, the critique of civilization articulated by Frantz Fanon, who would be 100 years old today. Fanon, born in Martinique and writing in French, famously exposed civilization as a colonial construct that produces alienation, racial hierarchy, and pressures the colonized to emulate the colonizer, for example, through language and cultural norms. Relevance of Fanon's thought for critical race theory, and if possible, how is Fanon engaged today among scholars working in or on Martinique?
Yeah, yeah. When it comes to Frantz Fanon and critical race theory, he's definitely in the corpus, intellectual corpus. He's in it. I don't know if he would accept to be included in that curriculum. That is a great question. But what I understood from reading Fanon and reading and living in Martinique, because I'm not saying you have to live here to understand Fanon, but living here would help you better understand who is Fanon. And I myself have read Fanon years before I came here, and it was not quite clear to me. But staying here did really open my eyes to what Fanon was talking about when it comes to colorism, race, essentialism, all that lack of self-esteem. But Fanon was not into race as a factor. Fanon completely rejected race. And even history that was essentialized, Fanon rejected. And culture, if it could not help to change the mind of the bourgeoisie or the mind of the masses, Fanon was not very much interested in culture. Fanon was very realistic. That's something I understand later. He was very realistic. He was mentioning material well-being, not in the sense of profiting like in a capitalist mind thinking. But Fanon was very much not into race as an issue because he was in disagreement with Senghor. During the conference of 1956, the Congress of Black Writers and Artists, his talk was culture and racism. That was the talk of Frantz Fanon. And he was mentioning the differences between the two words. And he was making it clear that we can point out racism as a phenomenon, but race as the concept that should be defining the characteristics or the identity of others. He was rejecting it completely. In critical race theory, I can understand the accusations of essentialism. There is some essentialism in critical race theory because race is considered as a valid tool, a valid factor, identity to understand how this one is treated, why this one is failing. That is a great question. So critical race theory has to be differentiated to Afrocentricity. That is part of the African American intellectual tradition. I did not mention it, Afrocentricity, known to Molefi Asante. That is deeply essentialist. It can be rejected in the US. It can also be rejected in Africa because the Africa that Afrocentric describes might be not well known to Africans. But critical race theory moves into the field of law, the law, how the law is limited and how the law should be doing some reconfiguration to come to an understanding of how racism is very subtle. That is critical race theory. I know it can be radical because it is pushing society to move beyond the liberal way of seeing things. Liberalism that was usually on the side of African Americans, even they do not really welcome critical race theory because it does move you from your friend zone, no, not friend zone, but your comfort zone, because critical theory, it disturbs. It asks a lot of questions, and we don't have all the answers. And the institutions are not open enough to really allow critical race theory to rewrite the law to say that this word should not be this, but that. And what they say is the law exists as a law. It is normative, but in reality, it should not be framed this way. and that's why it is deemed radical. In education, it is more radical also in education, but that's why it is being rejected completely. That's why diversity, inclusion, and equity programs are completely rejected, trampled, because category theory was moving and having a way to the federal institutions, and they have to stop it.
Can I ask a
Okay, so
short?
Yes,
Can I
come
ask
on,
a
come on.
short
Professor Brand, go
follow-up
on.
question?
Yes, go
Yeah,
on.
just a short follow-up question. This is most interesting, and thank you so much, Dr. Nguirane, for your fascinating talk. Here's my follow-up question. Do you think that Fanon was an essentialist? And if so, what would be your vision of an anti-essentialist approach that uses Colonel West, Barber, Hall, and all the other critical race theory experts and theoreticians, but in a more anti-essentialist and more opening way?
Yeah, but if I were, I might be wrong, because Fanon is very complex. I have to say it. Fanon is very complex because we all, last year we had a great conference in Dakar. I participated, and I wrote a piece on Frantz Fanon. It was a 3-day conference, bringing many scholars all over the world, the greatest specialists of Frantz Fanon. And I still question the relevance of having a conference on Frantz Fanon. What do we say about Frantz Fanon? I feel all has been said and done, and yet we still question Frantz Fanon's work. It's maybe there's something we don't understand. He didn't write too much, just 3 small books, very short books you can read, but a lot of things, something implicit, something explicit. But when it comes to essentialism, I would not consider Frantz Fanon as essentialist. Even Frantz Fanon, when he was questioning violence, he questioned violence in a very realistic way. And Cornel West, he is known for mentioning 2 great words, that is race embracing elites and race distancing elites. And they would consider Frantz Fanon as race distancing elites, because the way he criticized the black bourgeoisie, Frantz Fanon, is quite telling. He was criticizing the black bourgeoisie, and that's one of the pages of the book, The Wretched of the Earth, that most people would not read if they hold power, because it talked to them directly. That was not to use race as an excuse, because race can be used as an excuse. I understand it myself. From my own position, I know it can be used as an excuse, but it can exist as an analytical tool. So we can make the differences, but making the differences to make it now translated into public discourses, into public corrective measures we take, that is the most difficult part. But Fanon is not essentialist at all, to me.
Okay, so I move to one question from the audience now to Senegalese the students from, I have a graduate student, Cheikh Sam. Cheikh Sam said, how do African-American and Francophone feminist traditions converge and diverge? How do African-American and Francophone feminist traditions converge and diverge?
So when it comes to feminism, I would say that I'm not a specialist, but I did a mind map. A mind map, the intention was to map all the paradigms emerging from the theories of feminism, Black feminism, African feminism, Afrofeminism, womanism. And they came up with a lot of authors. And in France, I see many expressions of feminism. In our own country, that is Senegal, I see so many expressions of feminism. They do not go along. I don't know where do they take their sources. So Black feminism, as they know it and understood it from America, has some slight differences, even if most feminists do not like it, with African feminism. There are slight differences. We have to recognize it. Because the part of race that can be considered in Black feminism, you would not find it in African feminism, because African feminism does not necessarily include race. And even in African studies, the difference is it is easy to spot, because if you take African studies and African American studies, you can see the differences. In African studies, we do not necessarily talk about racism. Most of the time, we don't talk about racism. And they have questioned African studies for being silent to the issue of race and not including race as an issue. So I think that is the only thing that is the same paradigm that translates into feminism. But feminism, to be honest, as I understood it from my own country, is something that is not easy to understand. I myself, I'm not saying that I don't understand it, but it's not easy to understand, because I see so many, because I study intellectual traditions, I study them, I study movements, how do they emerge? Who are the architect of the movement? But in terms of feminism, if I were to draw my mind map, I would find many architects in Senegal, but also in Africa. They do not go the same way.
Okay. I see one question from Yasmina.
Yasmina, yeah.
Yasmina said, I wonder if French West Indies writers like Frantz Fanon and Aimé Césaire are also included in the curriculum and in the teaching of African American studies in France.
Because in the field of American civilization or Anglophone studies, they are not included, because when we say Anglophone studies, we study the culture, history, and experiences of Anglophone-speaking countries. That's how it works. For example, I can teach Barbados, I can teach Trinidad, St. Lucia. These are former British colonies, but not Martinique or the French, because it does not include that. So when we say British civilization in the field of Anglophone studies in France, we just study British, Great Britain, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and also the former British colonies and imperialism, but not any French-speaking country or Portuguese or German-speaking countries, no. But we have departments that study Portuguese civilization, German civilization, but if you are in the States, in a French department, you study French civilization, and then you will study Frantz Fanon and Aimé Césaire. How it is structured. It is institutional.
Okay, so I move to the question of Dr. Sane Alaji. You mentioned Margaret Atwood. Is it related to multiculturalism?
So
that's what. Yes, you mentioned Margaret Atwood in your presentation. Is it related to multiculturalism?
Did I mean multiculturalism?
And I will directly ask the question of Samandao. Yeah.
But I don't remember mentioning him.
I don't think he mentioned Margaret Atwood.
No, I don't remember.
No, I think he did not mention him.
I don't remember mentioning Margaret Atwood. I know that I study her novels in the courses that I teach with my students, because that was part of the required reading list 3 years ago. But it was not included. But in the specific context of South Africa, she would be on the topic of multiculturalism.
I saw it when presenting. I think there is a part in the bibliography you mentioned.
Okay. I understand now. I understand. Yeah, part of the Bible, but I did not. But did you see where I put red crosses?
Okay, I did not, because maybe it didn't appear on the presentation.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, that was she was on the list. I didn't mention, but I didn't mean to focus on Margaret Atwood. I wanted to show how diverse the curriculum is, and how the African American intellectual tradition in terms of literature is reflected in the course description. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Now, I think for Samba, now I should give you the floor so that you ask your question. Samba, can you turn on your microphone and ask your question? You can give Samba the function of a speaker, and Samba ask it.
Good day, everybody.
Good day, yeah.
How are you all doing?
Good.
We've enjoyed the debate. To be honest, we've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I believe that we are in front of academics of English language.
Thank you.
I would like to start from, I wanted to summarize what you've said, but let me start from asking some questions before we move further. First, my first question is based on identity. What is African American identity? And examples, if possible. That is my first question. I would like to ask you three, but my first question is, what is African American identity, with at least 2 or 3 examples?
Would you please ask all the questions together so that the speaker could answer them later
Of course,
together?
yes. Let me move further. I also would like to know about, what is African American culture, with at least some 3 examples. The third one is about race. How is race seen in African American context, with examples? Those are and the third one is the pedagogic methods that use writers like Gloria Lansing, Lansing Billings, and others. I also would like to know, in those pedagogic, how are you going to use what we call multiple intelligence method in a classroom, as far as those African American pedagogic, teaching methodology rather, is used in a classroom in a multiple intelligence way? Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
So thank you for the questions. Very broad. I'm trying to summarize, and just because answering the question when it comes to what is African American identity and culture is it is broad. But let me start with the last question. You mentioned Larson Billings. Larson Billings, she used critical theory in the field of education. She wanted to translate it. And she coined a very interesting word that can be used everywhere, that is culturally relevant teaching, culturally relevant education, an education that is reflective of the culture of others, or inclusive. That's what she is preaching. And it has been translated into other countries also. And in my teaching, it is not included because most of my classes are focused on studying history, culture, ideas, and so on and so on. So, but when I used to go to high schools to see how my students are teaching, because they are teachers in education, I could provide some way of behaving, of answering to questions, of looking at the students, okay, to make sure that they take into account all the dimensions. Yeah, but lesson Billings, apart from my research, I don't really translate her concept of cultural relevant teaching. When it comes to what is African American identity, wow, that is a very difficult question, I would say, because there are so many books and articles about
Hello,
African American identity.
if there are problems, I can myself intervene and give you those examples and make people understand it.
Yes, come on. Yeah, I would like to learn from you.
Samba, we cannot hear you. Maybe your microphone is muted.
I said, if he has some, dilemma, some difficulties explaining because he may not do it, I can intervene. Any problem that he has in anything that I ask, I can intervene and make it clearer for the audience.
I would very much learn from you. I would really very much learn from you if you have.
Samba, it would be easier. Samba now.
Yes.
It would be easier
I will start from the beginning. Where I ask, what is African American culture? When we talk about African American culture, we are talking about the mixture of African heritage and American influence. It is a mixture, an alliance of African heritage and what we call American influence. And I can give 3 examples by using, when we talk about the mixture of heritage, we use music in African, they prefer hip hops and jazz, isn't it? Literature about slavery and racism, food influenced by African roots. Can I reiterate?
Yeah.
Or can I continue?
Yeah, okay. But yeah, let me ask you a very brief question, and that is quite interesting. What you are mentioning, that is a mixture, and so on and so on and so on. So, have you read Melville Erskowitz and Franklin Fraser? Because that would summarize really your question.
No, I am in the 3rd semester. I didn't read many of them.
I would suggest you if you can find the book by Melville Erskowitz. He's an anthropologist, and Franklin Fraser.
My lecturer will take note of it. He will send it to me.
Thank you, Samba. I think he will recommend you some reading. Samba is a sophomore, so he's still very curious to know.
Can I continue about race? When we talk.
I think, Dr.
Thank you, Samba. Yeah, we have to move to next question. Who can that be? Isiak?
Yeah. So I think we could take the last. So there's a question by Amadou. What is one big lesson that French Anglophone Studies has learned from?
Amadou Jingali.
Okay, yeah.
Amadou Jingali. Let me check Amadou Jingali. Yes, Amadou Jingali said, what is one big lesson that French Anglophone Studies has learned from African American intellectual traditions? How can students today use African American history to better understand modern social movement in French-speaking countries?
These are great questions and relevant questions also. So when it comes to the lessons, there are many, but it is quite obvious, even if there are backlash when we talk about race, but the fact we talk about Blackness as it comes from the US, the fact that we mention racism all over and insisting on the existence of systemic racism did have an impact, even if it is little, because many scholars are questioning the understanding of racism and to move beyond classical approaches that just focuses on individual interactions. That is, you said this to me, you looked at me this way. That was mostly the basic question we asked. And that would not question racism, but that would help racism to better hide. Because racism, we have to name it. Unless you name it, you cannot fight it. So the African American intellectual tradition is transnational. It has always been transnational. What is quite interesting to see that beyond the US, the words resonates. There was a book published not long ago, and those questions are maybe new in the scholarship. That is to compare Booker T. Washington to a great intellectual who is Brazilian. I don't remember his name. I have the book with me. And it happened that they were connecting, because that was the Black Atlantic. They were connecting. And even the word used by Frantz Fanon, that is black skin, white mask, it has existed in Portuguese. Just to tell you that knowledge has always been circulating. And the circulation of knowledge can have an impact. The word in its meaning, in its specific context, might not translate directly into another context, as Edward said, but it can also make an impact on a decision. And that is the most interesting part that I see. But I have to tell you that there are many, many challenges when it comes to the Black radical tradition. When you study it, you have to make it clear that you are not an activist. You have to make it clear that you are teaching and only teaching as if you are playing basketball and not talking about politics. That's how it is. Thank you.
Okay, Isiaq, is it the last question, or we can take one more?
Sure.
Isiaq?
We can take one last question maybe if you want.
Okay, so yeah, not to end up brusquely, so we're going to take one last question. I'm going to check.
Can I speak? Yeah.
There is one iPhone. I don't know who it
Yeah,
is.
Mr. Njai, Bala Omar.
Yeah, Bala Omar Njai. How is the US felt after all in the translation, or say the transfer of these African American to French Anglophone Studies? How is the US felt after all in the translation, or say the transfer of these African American traditions into the French Anglophone Studies? This is the last question, and then we move to closing remarks.
Yeah, so let me, that is, because I don't see the question on the chat, but okay.
Mr. Ja, King Ja, Dr.
Come
Ja.
on, yeah, talk.
Okay, this is not my
Yes,
question.
Bala, you can speak directly, yes.
So this is not my question. Okay.
All right, so go and ask your question then.
Okay, my question, before that, I have to thank Dr. Nguirane with his, it was very, concise, precise, I learned a lot from your presentation, thank you very much. But now, today, we are living in a global village, and we saw that Black life still matter. Now, how can through African or the American literature in our contemporary society, how can we, how can we fight these stereotype, Black eye stereotype in money writings, Now, how come? Because I learned from the concept of Ubuntu, fair humanity ensemble, right? Now, do you think that today now, in our contemporary African literature, this Ubuntu concept can reunite the literature, can try to stop the stereotype that Black people are still victim, we are victim of racism, segregation, discrimination. And George Floyd was dead, was killed. And how now we need a new kind of African literature molded in or deeply rooted in our African tradition. Why not decolonize our pedagogy, to decolonize our pedagogy? It will be very difficult, if not to say decolonizing the mind, as what you were saying. But me, I have learned from the concept of Ubuntu, fair humanity ensemble, that is can help us now today to invent another kind of literature that unite, that help us to fight segregation, injustice, racial discrimination. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the question, Bala, and the comments. The word Ubuntu has been on the table for a very long time. So if you know South Africa, if you know the great humanist who was a close friend of Nelson Mandela, he preached Ubuntu all over the world. I don't know if the world listened. That is something. I don't have the answer if the world listened to him or not. But he was preaching Ubuntu all over the world. And I know that in the places I am living, there's a book that was published by someone, and the title is Ubuntu. And the one who published that book, because Ubuntu is embraced by everyone, because it is a very soft concept. It is something that brings universalism in another way. If it could work, it would be good, really, for humanity, because we, beyond all the differences, beyond all the paradoxes, it all converges to humanity. I know, I understand that. And Ubuntu is preaching that a word of humanity, of sharing and understanding each other. It is in interculturalism, it is in every aspect. But let's understand also that Ubuntu is being hijacked. It is happening, hijacked and captured. What it was intended is not what it is becoming right now. Because when a word is included in capitalist gains, it is no longer what it should be. And now in market branding, Ubuntu is everywhere. In branding, in everywhere you see Ubuntu. I don't know how it could translate, but popular culture does sometimes depoliticize some words and do not make it really, I would say, work and have some material manifestation. But I know that literature is at a time when a lot of people are not reading. We are teachers. Dr. Jan knows exactly what I mean. Having your student read, that's something challenging. I don't know how you do, but I'm looking for answers. How to get students to read. I'm looking for answers. If you have suggestions, give it to me. So to finish with Ubuntu, Ubuntu can be very interesting for the world. Africa has to offer something that is Ubuntu. And there are some advocates who says Ubuntu is what Africa has to offer. But next to Ubuntu, don't forget that we have Afrofuturism with its advocates. We have Afropessimism with its advocates. We have others, Afrocentrism with its advocates. All the isms, what I call the isms, Afropessimism, Pan-Africanism, Afrofuturism, they all work to build an Africa they dream. And I don't know if we can come together to put all the isms into Ubuntu to get one. If that can happen, that would be the future of Africa. But let's be realistic and look at what is happening in the continent somewhere to see if Ubuntu would settle all our difficulties and put us together to discover a better world. So that was just something that I was sharing. I'm not sure if I have answered to your question about Ubuntu, but I'm a little bit sometimes taking my distance about Ubuntu.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nguirane. And I hope Mr. Njai Bala Omar was satisfied. And as he said, the concept of Ubuntu is very much, renowned in Africa. And he talked about the contemporary of Nelson Mandela, that was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was a Nobel Peace Prize. Yes, that was Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, Desmond Tutu.
A lively person, yeah.
Yeah, and Desmond Tutu said, Ubuntu, it's a Zulu word that means I am because we are. Yeah. In I am because we are, it means I exist only if my community exists. It's a concept of community building. So an anthropologist developed it to show how Africans should be united and not to accept one single thing to divide them, but the spirit of communality, the spirit of building, and reconnection, that's very important. And you see, the champion, Desmond Tutu, was rewarded the Nobel Peace Prize, thanks to also the context. Imagine that's the same as Nelson Mandela, because South Africa was also hit by race issues. Yeah, if you read it in South African literature, you find it in the writings of Alex Lagoma or Andre Brink, or the other one, Nadine Gordimer, or Peter Abrahams. You find in all their writings these kind of things that come back. So it's very interesting, but we have to. I have to wrap up maybe, and then give the floor to Professor Gidi closing remarks. So this session was really fantastic. African American intellectual traditions in French Anglophone Studies was discussed as a main topic, and Dr. Nguirane has argued that African American intellectual traditions are not simply transferred into French, but are translated and reshaped within a distinct French academic and ideological framework. He has highlighted the tensions between American race consciousness approaches and French universalist traditions. African-American intellectual traditions in France are not simply adopted, but transformed. He has demonstrated all along his talk and also through the discussion. So they exist in a hybrid intellectual space shaped by negotiation, resistance, and reinterpretation within French academic system. So this is briefly what the talk gave, and as a host, I'm very much satisfied, and it's now time to really acknowledge IASA, the privilege and honor you have given us. I really thank the IASA community, the IASA Association, very much happy. So on behalf of my institution, time does not allow, but very high personalities were here, the vice presidents, provost in charge of research and innovation was here, and the other one in charge of student life. The other, officials are here. So my colleagues of the department, my colleagues in the whole university, all right, student associations, the Federal English Club, tutors, collaborators, other associations from the world. It's time to say thank you so very much. It's also time to say once again, thank you, Dr. Cheikh Nguirane, for accepting to be the speaker. That was a good choice. I did not make a mistake. I know who Cheikh was. Cheikh was very curious, yeah. So I give the floor back to Professor Brand and Professor Bilgi to say something on behalf of IASA. And maybe they will have to invite you to be connected to join the association, know more about it. So my last word is thank you so very much on behalf of the English department, on behalf of IASA chapter, which I have the honor to coordinate. And we hope to have more sessions. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan, Professor Brandt, would you like to go first?
It doesn't really matter. Okay. Thank you so much. I just have to say one thing because I found this so interesting. We are human only through our connection to others. This is Ubuntu, right? And this is basically what IASA says too, and what we are doing, and what we were blessed to witness today. This was wonderful, Dr. Dia. Congratulations. Thank you so much, Dr. Nguirane, for presenting this wonderful talk. I'm just flabbergasted. So thanks to all of you, and mission completed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for the great questions. Challenging.
Yeah, thank you as well. This was really amazing. The timing, we have been going more than 2.5 hours now, and so many people were interested. This was really great. And this is what actually IASA tries to accomplish. I love the use of the word Ubuntu, I guess. So let me change that. IASA is because you are. So
Yes. Good word. Good choice of word.
So thank you, and we hope to keep on with this kind of collaboration in different formats, maybe, or other formats, by adding people, or even in person at one time, hopefully. That we do that, and we thank everybody, especially Ishtiaq, for doing a great job for organizing this, and all our other board members, George, Maria, Elisabetta, they were all here to listen as well, and thank you again. Thanks to our speaker too. That was a great talk, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
Okay, thank you. One last word, thank you.
Yeah, just something that is that I did not mention, and that is so important to say before we leave, is that Dr. Dia, he was 1 year ahead of us, and he paved the way. He is very down to earth as a person, and he would not listen to that, but I know he paved the way for a lot of us. Most of us, he inspired us. He was in the English club, if I remember my years back when he was president of the English club, I was very shy. I was looking up to him as someone who would handle the language so easily, and we all know him. And he was known as King Ja, as the name of Dr. Martin Luther King. And he's a great person in his way of doing things, welcoming new coming students. And we all remember that. We all remember that. And thank you so much for keeping the fire really burning again and again and connecting. When you came to me, it was a great pleasure. Really, it was a great pleasure because that was a very long time I didn't see him. But he came to me, inviting me. That was a great pleasure. And I thank you for that. And
Thank you,
Also,
Cheikh.
he will continue doing that. Yeah.
Dr.
Thank you.
Cheikh, we would love to have you sometime in our Emerging Scholars webinar. So I would reach out to Dr. Jia, and if you could talk to us, to the emerging scholars, that would be really great. And
I will.
also, especially, yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Dr. Jia, for reaching out to us on IASA, on IASA's Facebook, and also to Professor Brent, who, along with you, managed the whole thing, executed the entire thing with all the collaborations. This meeting should be available on YouTube in a few days. Please follow us on our socials on Facebook. I just pinched in the link on the chat box. Also, our website, please check out our website as well. And we hope to see everyone very soon. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for attending this. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.